Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to be talking about our top 5 unique worker placement games. Before we get into that, we have a poll to discuss. So I asked the poll on our Blue Sky account and our Facebook group and on our Patreon page. One of the cool things about our Patreon page is you can go to patreon.com/boardgamehottakes and you can subscribe for free. You don't even have to donate or anything, but we will be posting our polls there as well. And any free subscribers can use those. But that's the nice thing for people that don't want to be on social media. If you still want to engage with the polls but not have to join Facebook or something, then go ahead and check that out. The poll question I asked today was, if you upgrade components for a board game, what do you do with the replaced components? And I had a very specific reason to ask this. I'll get into that in a second. But here are the options I gave on the poll. Throw them away, got 7%. Keep them in the original box, got 37%. Store them somewhere outside of the game box, got 51%. And I don't upgrade components, got 5%. How'd you guys answer this?
This was the easiest poll you've ever done, Tim, because the answer was so obvious to me. I keep that stuff. I'm a pack rat. Although I forget, one of our listeners at some point made some kind of a comment where it was like dragon gold hoarding kind of like analogy that I thought sounded a lot more attractive than pack rat. But anyway, I'm a pack rat or a gold hoarder or whatever. So, but I'm not keeping that stuff in the same box. So I take all those things, I stick them in bags or even just like loose and drop them in a drawer. So I actually have like these 1 or 2 drawers in a cabinet in my game room that are just like this sea of unused cardboard chits and coins. And if I had to go in there now and actually figure out which game they belong to, I don't think I could ever do it. But at least I got all that stuff there if I ever do need it.
That's okay. So I'm doing the same thing. And here's the reason I asked the question, because I'm reconsidering my life choices. I've got this big, huge Clank Legacy box stuffed full with baggies of old components. And I just don't know that I need it. And I was talking to my friend Dano the other day and was talking about this. And he's like, why do you keep those? And I was like, well, because, if I sell the game, then he's like, you got upgraded components. The person you sell them to doesn't want those bits any more than you want them in there. And he's absolutely right. And so I think I'm going to throw them away. I think I'm going to get rid of all those components, maybe keep some things that are like little minis or like, meeples or things like that, or coins. Or like metal coins that I don't know. Most of it's just cardboard crap. So I think I'm just going to throw it all away and not keep it anymore. I did when I first got into the hobby and I started upgrading some games. That's what I did. I threw this stuff away. And I think what happened was I decided I wanted to be a board game designer. So I thought these would be great prototype components. And so I started to save a few of them. And then it just became a habit. And now I don't know why I save them. And now I'll sell a game and forget to get the old components. So I have like baggies of used components for games I don't even own anymore. And who needs that? So I think I'm ready to move on and start throwing them away.
When do we get to see the prototype, Tim?
Probably never.
So I'm with you guys. I think like Chris, I have a giant tub here I'm holding up of old, well, some of these aren't even old. Some of these are like the upgraded Terraforming Mars components. I have some stuff for Android Netrunner. I have the airships from Scythe. I don't even own Scythe anymore, but I have that expansion. So I have just a bunch of stuff in this bin, and then I have a couple drawers here and there. But why do I hold on to it? I don't know. Lately, my little 2-year-old has been looking for something to do. I'll roll out one of the neoprene mats and I'll just dump this stuff on there and let her go to town, start making these little worlds. She can get the little forests from Terraforming Mars and put those out in little cities, and the airships are flying above that. And then some portals that are going in and out of this world. So it's just some fun little chunky tactile stuff for her to play with. That's the main reason why I'm keeping this stuff around. And then, yeah, I thought like Tim at one point, maybe, we can use this stuff to prototype. I have never come close to doing any of that kind of stuff with these things. But I think just even having them around for future crafting. I got 3 girls in the house and Sarah too, who is a craft master. Maybe someday these will come in handy for some little knick-knack project they want to do or something. So for now, I'm keeping this stuff around. Usually I'm all for throwing stuff out and getting rid of it. But for some reason I've kept these. I don't know. They're pretty fun. Fun little chunky old board game components. Keeping them around for now.
So it sounds like your daughter is going to be both of you guys to the prototype.
Quite possibly.
So, Adam, I don't understand why you have those upgraded Terraforming Mars bits in your extra component bin. Why are they not in your box? Why are you using the old cardboard Terraforming Mars bits, or what's going on here?
You know what? I like the old cardboard Terraforming Mars stuff the best. I bought everything fits in the original box. I've got a nice little set to organize everything. And if I had these other components, like I'd have to put those in there. Everything just slides in and out. And that's the way I played it 120 something times with that old, just the regular city tiles or regular four. You flip them and then force on the other side. It's so nice that everything fits inside the box. The original old school, so Terraforming Mars. But that's the one game I'm like all old school on is Terraforming Mars. The first game that I was introduced to the hobby with, the modern board game hobby with. So I'm keeping it like it is. I don't need this upgraded junk.
I'm disgusted. When you said that, I thought you were going to say, well, I upgraded him a second time, and this is the middle iteration of that. Not that you went back to the cardboard chits. I thought Tim was joking when he said that.
I never said goodbye to the cardboard chits. I don't think I ever will.
All right, well, here's how some of our listeners answered. Over on Patreon, Shelby said, I'll hang on to them until enough time has gone by, and then I'm recondo them. I'm trying really hard not to just collect stuff. I always feel better after letting things like that go. I haven't regretted it once so far. And I have a feeling I will not regret it either when I throw all this stuff out. I think that's going to be my weekend project. Over on Blue Sky, Chris said, so far, I've kept most of it in a drawer for future prototyping if I ever get around to designing my own game, or for spare parts if ever needed. But they'll likely get tossed eventually, like all of those old cables. Yeah, we know about those cables. I go through and clear those out every once in a while. Thassa said, I tend to keep them in the same box if I can, just in case. Nothing's happened yet. Just seems like a waste to get rid of them. Well, always good to have a backup plan, I suppose. And so Orchid on Blue Sky, you should go check out this thread, but they said that they put them in a shadow box. If you don't know what a shadow box is, it's basically like you can it's like a 3-inch thick wooden box that has a picture frame in the front of it. So you can kind of like make a diorama or something in there. But what they showed in the picture is they have it divided into like 8 different sections or 16 sections in there. And they've taken all the bits of different colors and put them in the same section. So you've got like a whole bunch of blue stuff and a whole bunch of purple stuff and a whole bunch of red stuff. So it's just this colorful kind of art project, taking all these old bits. It looks pretty cool. Over on Facebook, Lacey said, hoard them, hoping to use them in crafts. And Chris said, as a game designer, I keep all that stuff to use in prototyping my own games. Scott said, I save them in a tub with all the rest of the components I someday may need. I hope it's not the same tub you use, because I bet they're not in very good condition anymore. And Seth said, I feel bad for the original components when I replace them. So I sit down with them and I tell them, before we break up, just know it's not you, it's me. Oh, wait, no, it is you. I can do better. Goodbye. Then I throw them in a drawer somewhere.
Before we go on here, those are all great responses, but I'm looking at this colored, the shadow box thing, and on the side of that, on the edges of the picture, it looks like, and I only know this because I've been on TV a lot lately, it looks like those are some of the stones from the Fifth Element, which would be amazing.
That's funny.
I hope that's what those are. I'm pretty sure that's what those are. Nice job, Orchid, the board game, with your Fifth Element collector's items as well.
Very nice. All right. One last thing before we jump into our feature topic. If you're listening to this the week that the episode comes out, you still have a chance to help us get a nomination in the Board Game Geek Golden Geek Awards. This is a very exciting moment. It's one of the only places that board game podcasts are recognized that there's any kind of awards for. And last year we scored a nomination. We were one of the top 10, People's Choice votes for best podcast in that award. So we're really excited and hopeful that we'll get your nomination again this year. You can vote for us by going to boardgamegeek.com, and there's a link right on the homepage about getting, being part of the Golden Geek nominations. You do have to create an account. It's free. And if you create an account, you do have to use some gold, what they call Geek Gold, which is a fake currency that the site uses. But don't worry if you don't have any. I'm happy to provide it to you. Just drop me a email at tim@boardgamehottakes.com with your Board Game Geek username, and I'll send you the 20 Geek Gold you need to vote. It's really simple to vote. Please give us a vote for the nomination. So that voting will run until April 21st. And then after the nominations are closed, the top 10 podcasts that receive votes will be eligible for the actual award. And so voting for that award will run for 10 days. It'll run till about the end of the month, around April 30th. So please get out there and give us a vote for your nomination. Even if you're listening to this a little bit later, you can get out there, and if we've made a nomination again, then we can get you could give us a vote for the actual award, and we would really, really appreciate it. So please get out to boardgamegeek.com and give us a vote out there for best board game podcast. All right, well, let's jump into our topic for today, and that is top 5 unique worker placement games. Now, by the way, this topic was chosen on a poll by our Patreon supporters. So if you support us on Patreon, we will be posting polls asking for your feedback on episode content, what games we're going to be playing, etc. And this week, Adam, Chris, and I all picked a topic that we wanted to discuss, and we put it up for a poll on our Patreon page. And this is the one that got picked. And this is so exciting to me because I have literally been asking to do this episode for like 2 years, and Adam and Chris won't even respond to me anymore. So thank you, supporters, for finally getting this on the table, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
I'm glad that you're getting your due here, Tim.
All right, so what is a worker placement game? Well, we did an episode 3 months back or so about Board Game Dictionary. So if you want a more in-depth discussion on what worker placement means, you can go check out that episode. But basically, it's usually when you've got action selection, where the way you do that action is that you're going to take some kind of shit, some kind of bit, and put it on a space that represents the action you're going to take. You get the action, and then other people can't use the same space. That's a very basic type of worker placement. But we didn't want to just talk about our favorite worker placement games. We wanted to talk about games that did worker placement in a unique way, that kind of took that core mechanism and twisted it, perverted it in some way, maybe enhanced it in some way, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So let's just jump right in to number 5.
I can't wait to hear about your perverted mechanisms, Tim. I'm looking forward to that. But in the meantime, I'll start with my number 5, which is Lost Ruins of Arnak, designed by Min and Elwin and published by Czech Games Edition. I'm guessing that pretty much everybody who's listening to this show is probably fairly familiar with this game. But the basic thing for those who may not have played it is that your workers are like little adventurers. They're like Indiana Jones type folks going out there looking for the lost ruins and the treasures. And so the board has a couple of different action areas. There's a research area that I'm not going to focus on because that's not so much the worker placement, but it's the adventure area. I don't know which is the adventure map. And there's a number of spaces out. There's some at the bottom, which are basic campsites that can give you a basic benefit, like some coins or some compasses that you can use to travel. But then farther up the board, you have areas that you can explore that are of different challenge levels. So there's ones that require you to have 3 compasses, and there's ones that require you to have 6 compasses. And when you put one of your workers out on those spaces, a few things happen. One is you get some automatic benefit. 2 is that space gets flipped and you find some kind of a creature there that you're going to have to fight off if you don't want to take a negative fear card. And then there's some kind of an advanced benefit that you're going to get that comes from that specific space. There's usually the first benefit I mentioned is kind of like a little mini benefit. So you're actually getting a number of benefits, and there's also a potential negative that comes with the monster. And the reason why I picked this game is because it is so highly thematic, which is something you don't always necessarily think of when you think of worker placement. And we've talked about a lot of examples of places where, games where there was some thematic element to it. But this one, I think, sort of takes it to the next level. Because your workers, these little adventurers of yours, you pick your spot, and then all the things that triggers are so cool. And they're all so thematic. So you're sending your worker out to go explore some ruin somewhere. Well, they're gonna get an automatic benefit. They're gonna flip a monster. You're gonna find out what you have to do to kill that monster if you decide that you're gonna go that route. And you're gonna get all these benefits, these idols, and various other things. And so all of this happens in a way that just feels so much like a story. You're watching a movie. You're listening to a story as you're playing this. And just from the fact that so much happens and it's so thematic, I thought this game stood head and shoulders above so many of the worker placement games out there and deserved mention on this list.
Well, I think one of the things that does also make this worker placement unique that you didn't mention is that there is you also have to basically spend these travel icons to get to the different spaces, or maybe you did mention it, but basically to do that, usually you're doing that by discarding cards. So it's kind of a combination of not just, you can't just take any worker placement space that's open. You have to have the type of icon that you need to represent that. Some other games have done that as well. I'll be talking about one that uses a similar mechanism, but I do think that makes it stand out a little bit.
So remind me, I haven't played this game in a while. Do you actually have a little workers that you're putting out there on the board? You do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you have two little guys with fedoras, two little adventurers.
Gotta have the hat.
You gotta have the hat. And but there's a number of free actions you could do too, right? So it's not just the worker placement. You could there's a bunch of other stuff you could do.
No, that's mostly, so you have a hand of cards. You can just play the cards. So most of the cards that you have are not just the travel icons, they're kind of multi-use cards. So you could just use the card to do something. So that's an action you could take without your worker. And then the core of the game is this temple track that you're moving up on the right hand side, but you have to spend resources to move up there. So you generally have to do some combination of putting workers out to get resources to move up this track, which might get you other benefits, other bonuses and things.
Yeah, that's a great pick, Chris. And one of the best game boards in the business, I think. I love this art on the game board. You got the sort of aquatic delta going inland towards the volcano, and on the right side and on the left side, you've got the rugged badlands as you are trying to track back that way. So cool. And like you said, Chris, it evokes a lot of theme as you're playing Lost Ruins of Arnak.
Yeah, it's a worker placement game that doesn't really feel like a worker placement game.
Yeah.
All right, well, my first pick, my number 5 here is Raiders of the North Sea. This was designed by Shem Phillips and published by Garphill Games. Raiders of the North Sea is pretty clever because everyone starts the game with just one worker, and that is the most workers that you will ever own the rest of the game. But what's unique about it is that when you go and take a worker placement spot, and they're pretty typical worker placement spots, you're going to go put a guy in a space and you get coins, or you'll put a guy in a space and you'll recruit a Viking for your ship, or you'll put a guy in a space and get some provisions. But after you place that one worker, you then pick up another worker off another space and get the benefit of that space as well. So that's really cool. It's like you always have just one, but you're kind of making two choices in a turn, but it's dictated by what the other players, where have they left their workers, so that you can take advantage of taking that one back, and where are spaces open that you can still place. The other thing that's a little unique here is there are 3 different colors of workers. Everyone starts with just these black workers, and a lot of the spaces will require specific colors of workers. So you might have to have the gray or white workers to go there. But some of them just have better benefits if you have the gray or white workers. Some of them have better benefits if you use the black workers. So there's definitely a decision to make. But the way you get the white or the gray workers is that you have to go out and pillage. And that's kind of the whole point of the game, is you're collecting resources so you can send your Viking ship across the sea and then go pillage these little villages. And once you pillage a village, you get the worker that was that rhymes. That's pretty good.
That's right.
Once you pillage those little cities, you pull the worker back, and that was just left there at the start of the game. So that's how we start to get some of those gray workers and the white workers in. But those stronger workers are needed to take some of the better actions and to pillage further up into the inland. So it's a pretty clever use, a very simple system that works great, but creates really fun decisions every time you're taking your turn.
Well, that's just sillyage. I've never played this game. Where does it rank for you on the Garphill Games, echelon?
I like it a lot. I had it for a while, and I think the only reason why it hasn't stuck for me, because I like the worker placement a lot, but the way that the pillaging works is it's just this like jumble of components dropped out in this space, and the whole game feels a bit of a bit cluttery to me. Like there's a lot of bits and components and things that I don't know, it's okay. It feels, I guess, just a little bit redundant, because since you're kind of collecting the same resources then to go take an action to go and pillage a space, it got a little repetitive for me. So I like it. I would play it again. I just wasn't playing it a lot, so I moved my copy on, but I like it. There was a remake of it. I forget what it's called now, but they made a new remake.
Raiders of Scythia.
Yeah, Raiders of Scythia. So Sam Phillips, who's done a lot of the artwork for the other Garphill games, did the artwork on this one. So it's got a little bit of a different style, and they kind of streamlined it in ways that I think are positive. So I'd be kind of interested in checking that one out and seeing if it felt a little more fun to me. But I played it enough to know that I don't need to own a copy of it, but it's a game I'd go back to anytime. But I did really like the worker placement mechanism, and I would be happy to see that used again in another game that put it in with some other stuff combined. I thought it worked really well.
Hey, Tim, this is one of those games that you and I played a long time ago, and I just don't remember it, right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
All right, up first for me, I'm going to start the cheating here early and not too often. I think this is my only cheat of the night, but this is going to be a combo pick. This is bus and dominant species. So first for bus, they both use, and I'm doing this because they both use a very similar sort of worker placement programming method. Bus is designed by Jerome Duman and Joris Fuyersinga. This is a Splotter spelling game. That's who makes this one. And Dominant Species is designed by the late Chad Jensen and published by GMT Games. So while we're talking about dominant, I'm going to stick with Dominant Species here first. That's the one I know a little better. You've got this area control section on the left side of the map, but the way you're going to do any of your actions is you take your action pawns and you've got this whole sort of layout, this whole sort of grid on the right side of the board, and you're going to place them. All players are going to place all of their action pawns before any player resolves any of the action. So you get all these pawns out there, and then you're pulling them off, and that's when you resolve the action. So you go top, bottom, left to right, pulling your guys off, and that's when you do the action. And bus is very similar in the way it resolves top, bottom, left, right, and then you do your action. Now these both have a little bit of a hook to them. You know, they have the standard kind of actions and put more cubes out there and put this little nugget over here and move these guys this way. So there's all that going on. Dominant Species, the very last, the bottom row of actions there is the domination effect. That's where you grab one of these cards. These might have some crazy, wacky effect, wipe off a tile from the board, or this volcano destroys all species within these like 3 separate tiles, or different things going on. So these cards just add a little bit of chaos to the game. And similarly in bus, you have a spot. All you're trying to do in bus is you're trying to get workers from work to the pub to their house. And that's the whole method of the game. It's kind of a fun little game if you haven't played it. But there's a spot in bus where it freezes time, and it's an option. So you can put your worker there and time freezes. None of the workers, the patrons, the people that you're trying to get from place to place to place, none of them go anywhere because time's frozen. So they stick where they are. That can really throw a wrench into everybody's plans. If you haven't played bus, it's a great game. It's hard to score more than like 5 points in that game, but it's a blast to give it a try. Dominant Species can go on for a while, but it's pretty neat too. You've got cubes galore and chits galore and GMT games and a lot of things going on in both of these games. Both great games, I think. Both ones I haven't played much lately at all. So bus and Dominant Species, I think, very unique worker placement programming going on.
Yeah, I've never played bus, but I have played Dominant Species with you one time, and I think that is one of the coolest worker placement mechanisms I've seen, because it's so impactful, not only about whether you're going to get the action you want, but because the timing that you place it there, and since they resolve left to right, there's a lot of other choices. You can say like, hey, I'm definitely going to be able to get that action because they're not going to block me out before it comes back around to me, but they're going to get the better version of it. They're going to get the first selection. So it works really cool. I'd love to try bus if it's got a similar mechanism. That sounds fun.
Regardless of the mechanism, I'm just fascinated at the idea of this game where it's about getting people from work to the pub to home, but it features like time warping. And
it's a fun.
Who came up with this? Well, I guess we know the designer, right?
Yeah, it's a fun one. It's excruciatingly painful at times, but it's a pretty neat game.
I'm actually going to keep along that same line with my next choice. And by that same line, I mean some of that programming and delayed benefit, which I think is actually a pretty interesting mechanism. And it led me to pick my number 4 game, which is Come Together, which was designed by Vegard Eliasson Stillerud, Eilif Svensson, and Asmund Svensson, and published by Chill Fox Games. This is a 2022 game that I haven't actually played yet, but I'm somewhat familiar with, and I really want to play. And one of the reasons is because of the interesting worker placement mechanism that this game features. And it does some of that same programming and delayed benefit action that you were talking about, Adam. The idea behind Come Together is that it's the late 60s, and you're trying to put on the best music festival, kind of in the vein of Woodstock, and each player is trying to do the best and get the best acts in order to draw in the biggest crowds and to give the fans what they're hoping to hear, because you've got fans who want to hear rock and some want to hear country and some want to hear folk, and trying to make sure you get the right people in to do the right music for the right crowds and give you the most glory and have the best music festival of the 1960s. But where the worker placement piece comes into this is that one of the options you have is for all these different areas, like you have a campground area where the people can camp out, and you have a stage area where you recruit your musicians, that sort of thing. For each of those, you can put out workers that will trigger a card, but they don't trigger the card right away. So you might get a small immediate benefit, but the larger benefit, the ability to take that card and have it do something more meaningful in your scoring tableau, in your board, doesn't happen right off the bat. It doesn't happen until you actually activate the space. And when you activate the space, it's going to activate for everybody that has workers out there in that particular zone. So you're making a choice of whether or not you want to give that benefit to everybody and they all get to take their cards, or whether you want to wait. And of course, in a situation like that, there may be benefits to putting workers out in other places to lock down other cards. But every time you do that, you're not activating and pulling in the cards that you've invested in so far. So theoretically, you could end up having a very rough situation where you have a worker who's out there tied up for a long time because you don't want to activate them yet and give the for whatever reason you have for not activating. So there's a lot of sort of pre-planning that you have to go through, and in that kind of programming, so to speak. This is actually similar, and I think in a way, based on those same things, from the game The Great Wall by Awaken Realms, which we played a few years ago at Portland Con. And in that game, when you put workers out to take resources, the resource production wouldn't actually trigger unless all of the worker placement spaces for a given production area were filled. So for example, if you had a forest where you'd get wood, you had to fill in all the spaces, or somebody had to fill in all the spaces before the activation would happen and the resources would come back. I think this is a little bit more interesting. That was a little bit more basic, but it's the same kind of idea, and I think similar in some ways to the idea that you were talking about, Adam.
Yeah, interesting one, Chris. I had not heard of this game before. I see one of the designers is part of the design team that made Revive, but I'm curious, what put this on your radar? How did you run across it?
I wanted to do some research for this one because I feel like I just didn't want to talk about the same games that I already talk about all the time. And I thought about Great Wall, and I just didn't want to talk about it again. So I went out looking for some games that had similar mechanisms. And that was one that came to my attention. And it not only caught my attention because of the interesting mechanism, but because I really like the theme of it. It looks like a very highly thematic worker placement game with a pretty unique and interesting theme. So I really want to try this one now.
Yeah, Chris, this game looks far out. It looks a little trippy. In fact, it looks like some nods to Elton John and Jimi Hendrix in some of the cards here. The card art is fantastic, very flower childy. It looks cool.
Very groovy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my number 4 is a game we have talked about before, but not too often. This is Lorenzo Il Magnifico. This was designed by Flaminia Bergini, Virginia Gigli, and Simone Luciani, and published by Cryo Creations. This is it's basically a dice worker placement game, but with a very unique twist to it, in that every player has 4 little tokens of 4 different colors. There's a white, black, and orange, and then what would be considered just a generic. It's just wood. It's unpainted. And at the start of each round, 3 dice are rolled, a white, a black, and an orange. And the pips that come up on those dice are communal. So that means that everybody's going to get to use their token at the same power that was rolled for that specific dice. And so this makes it pretty interesting in that you have that fluctuation, because of course the pips represent the power of the action you're taking. And so you have that fluctuation round to round of which color worker is going to be very powerful, or did we just roll 3 ones? And so everyone's got these tiny little actions, but it's dice worker, it's dice in a way that it doesn't negatively impact one person who's having a bad dice roll or bad luck or whatever. So I really like this part of it. You can, of course, adjust the dice and there are these workers you can spend to increase the power on them. But I thought that's a pretty unique thing. There's a few other things the game does that's unique, including that basically what you're doing, this is a tableau builder. So you're using these workers to go out to the central board and buy cards. And the first person that goes to a specific column of cards gets that at whatever the cost is printed on the card and gets the benefit for it. But the next person that wants to go to that same column has to pay 3 coins to do it. And coins are pretty tight. Money's hard to come by in this game. So it doesn't block you out of this, that column of actions if you want to take it, but it will make it harder. So you got to choose very carefully which are the first actions you're going to take in. The last thing that I think is really unique about the worker placement here is that one of the parts of your tableau is a production engine. There's actually 2 different production engines in this game. And in most games, if there's a production engine, they just trigger at certain times at the end of the round or whatever. That doesn't happen here. You have to go and take a space that triggers production, but the production costs on each of these cards that trigger have a certain pip value on them. So it might be 2 pips or 5 pips. So whatever worker you place there only is going to trigger the cards that match or are below the number of pips that are required for that. But only one person gets that full powered action. The next person has a discount of 2 pips, meaning like even if they put a 5 there, only triggers a 3. So again, very tight, the types of exact decisions I love in worker placement. But I think just the dice, the kind of the randomness of how everybody's workers have different values every round, I think is pretty unique about this one.
Tim, you're saying some words that just turned me off to worker placement games. You're saying, okay, so there's...
I got more coming.
One of the things that's rough for me about a lot of worker placement games is when you get locked out. I even have a game where you get totally blocked out of a space. It can be so frustrating to me. I got to the space because I'm first in turn order, and now you can't do it anymore. Now I'm going to win. So that's always a frustrating move for me. And then, or when you can go to a space and it ends up costing 3 excruciating coins more, and that just ruined your other 2 turns because, So some of the choices that come out of worker placement games, especially like Lorenzo Il Magnifico, then you add in the arbitrary dice roll of what's this value going to be because I rolled these dice this way, and we all got to deal with that now, and it's not even like a fun thing. Oh, this game gets my blood boiling, and
it's a very fun thing for me.
The game blood boiling all the wrong ways here.
Up until the dice part, I thought that Adam was describing Barrage, a game I know he loves.
That's so funny. Yes, exactly.
That is a great worker placement. Is it a worker placement game? I don't even know.
That is absolutely a worker placement game.
We should have mentioned that. That one's rad.
It's not unique though. That's the worker placement, and that is
very unique. I can tell you how it's very unique.
But I don't even particularly like Lorenzo Il Magnifico, but I do like the dice placement in this game. I think that is my favorite part of it.
Well, I'll go into my blocky worker placement game. This is Anachrony. This is designed by David Turksi, Victor Peter, and Richard Amon, and by Mind Clash Games. So what I do like about this one, first of all, you have 4 or 5 different types of workers. I can't remember the exact count, but each of these workers has something that they're in general pretty good at. So a couple spaces out there that you want to use those workers for because they give you some little bonus or kickback when you go there. And then maybe there's a spot that those workers, you can't even use them because, for instance, you can't use a mechanic to go do a Brainiac's job, or I don't think you use a mechanic to go like recruit some people. You don't want a mechanic, be in the face of your company and trying to talk people into joining your little faction. You don't want that to happen. So I think that's pretty funny. So not only do these different workers have the different things they can or can't do, but then you've got the exosuits. So are you going to put the workers out onto the treacherous planet where this thing is happening and you got to have this exosuit on to go get stuff done? Or have you built up your worker placement spots in your own city enough? Your little tableau in this case is a city of worker placement spots. And I think that's pretty neat too, the way this develops and you get better worker placement spots as the game goes on. Hopefully you don't need to use those exosuits too much anymore as the game goes on. They get pricier and pricier as the game's going on. So I think that whole trade-off of the exosuits or not, and you're building up your tableau of worker placement spots that don't require an exosuit, and all the different type of workers that do great in some spots and not so great in other spots make Anachrony a pretty nice worker placement game for me. It can get a little blocky, I think, at 3 or 4 players. I really like this one at 2. It's kind of a chess matchy. Not really a chess match. It's more fun at 2 players. It seems a little more open. 3 or 4 players, you run out of spaces really quick, I feel like, and you can get stuck.
The idea of having the exosuits that you have to power up and that use more energy and are more difficult to use, as one aspect of it, but you're trying to build up your city where you don't have to do that, I think is a really appealing mechanism. I actually think that's really clever and really cool. I just wish that it translated into a game that I actually enjoyed playing.
The one other thing about this, from the worker placement perspective, you didn't mention is that at the end of the round, you don't get your workers back. They're sleepy. They want to go rest, and the only way to get them back is you have to wake them up. And so you have to have left a worker over so that you can send them to wake them up, and you have to have enough water resources to like freshen them up, I guess. Or you can be mean and you can just like take this free action that wakes them all up, but then you lose points, you lose morale for them. So it's this game is so hard to plan around, but for me, I love all those decisions with the worker choices and getting those all set up. So this is a great pick.
So my number 3 is a game that we played and reviewed. I don't know, it feels like a couple years ago. It was probably more like a year ago, but it keeps coming up in my mind as one that I want to play again, but I just never managed to get it done, partially because I don't own a copy. I don't think any of us owns a copy of it. It's Terracotta Army, designed by Przemysław Fornal and Adam Kopinski and published by Board and Dice. And in Terracotta Army, you are master sculptors that are making these terracotta soldiers that you want to bury in, I guess it's the Emperor's tomb. And what makes it interesting from a worker placement perspective is that the worker placement actually takes place on this rondel. It's a circular space where each of the 3 levels of this 3-layered circle. So if you think about sort of like 3 concentric circles, each of those rings can turn. And so each of those has multiple spots on it with different worker placement actions. So as you're moving your workers around the outside of the circle, you get to do all 3 of the actions as long as you have the resources to do them and you're able to. You can do all 3 of the actions on going from the outside all the way to the interior of the circle. And because they can all move, you essentially have these customizable worker placement spaces, and you can spend coins. There are various mechanisms that you can use in the game to turn those to your benefit so that you have the right actions that are lined up so that when you take your turn, you get to do the things you want to do. And I just remember being fascinated by that because it was a super interesting puzzle to try to figure out, how do I get myself set up so that when I'm moving my next turn, I can get the right actions lined up so that they can all happen at the same time. And I can have the most efficient possible turn, because you could do it one turn, do one of those actions, then the next turn, do the next action, but you want to get them all at the same time so that you can be more efficient. I thought that was super cool. I wish I remember more of the details of this game, other than the fact that I really enjoyed it. I think we actually all enjoyed playing it. Adam, as I recall, you were actually not with us for that play.
That's right. I had to boogie out early. I think there was some family stuff happen I had to attend to. I remember taking a couple, 2-3 turns. It was fantastic, Chris. I remember this one too. I really wish I got to play the whole game with you guys.
Yeah. Tim, you at one point, I think, were thinking about buying a copy of this. Did you ever do it?
I never did. I really enjoyed this game, and so I think that I would like to go back to it. I mean, that worker placement decision of, getting the 3 benefits every time you take an action and getting to adjust those wheels was so fun. And if it sounds like it adds some analysis paralysis, it absolutely does. I remember that it could make some turns go long because of that, but had a great payoff in my opinion. I would love to revisit this. Haven't picked it up. If I see it on sale at some point, I probably will, so I can give it some more tries.
Yeah, same here.
Maybe this is one we got to, so we're, by the way, listeners, we're all signed up to go to BGG Con in Dallas in November of this year. So this is one maybe we can pull out of the library and bust out there if one of us doesn't own it by that point.
Great idea.
Oh, great.
Well, cool. My next pick is a game I just played a couple weeks ago. I talked about briefly on the show last week, but I haven't really gone into too much detail. But this is The Godfather, Corleone's Empire. This was designed by Eric Lang and published by Kaman. And this is a very interesting game because from a worker placement perspective, for a couple of reasons. Well, let me explain how it works. Basically, there are, at the start of the game, you have 4 workers, and 3 of them are your thugs, and they have these square bases on them. And then you have 1 family member, they have a circle base on it. And the board is a map of New York, and it's got all these districts in it. So there's like 7 different regions. And in each of those regions can be between like 1 and 3 businesses that are there. And at the start of the game, each of the regions has 1 and sometimes 2 businesses there, depending on the player count. And the worker placement is really simple. You take one of your thugs, you put them in the front of the business, and you just get the benefit that's listed there. So it might be something like a resource like a gun or blood money, or maybe you can convert a card into dollars. Really straightforward for those guys. But your family members get a lot more interesting because they've got a circle base, and in between all the regions are these little circle spaces. And each of those circle spaces is going to be connected to at least 2 regions, but it might be connected to 3 even. When you place your family member out, they get the benefit of the front of the business on every single one of the regions they're connected to. So they could get anywhere between 2 to 5 benefits when you place them, but you've only got one of them. So you got to be really careful about where you place them. But more importantly, you have to be careful because at the end of the round, there's an area control check. And you look at all of the thugs and family members that are in that region. And if anyone has a majority control, you put a little control marker in that territory. And why that's really important is that with the second round and on, whenever a thug goes to one of those front of business sections, whoever controls the territory, if it's an opponent, they get the benefit as well. So by controlling that territory, you're basically getting yourself free actions for future rounds. And so, of course, you don't want your opponents to get those. You want to get them, but you also want the actions you take. So it's a really interesting decision of, do I just get that benefit I want, or do I put them over here, get a weaker benefit, but block out my opponent from getting control of that region, or take control of it myself? Over the course of the game, you end up getting more family members. So by the end of it, you have 3 family members and your opponents, and you have 3 thugs. So you get a lot of fun choices, and it gets very competitive, and those control tokens are going back and forth. And at the end of the game, so at each round, you're going to do that control check, and you'll put another token on top. So if you controlled it, and then somebody else controlled it, then they put a token on. If you control it again, you put a token on. At the end of the game, you score, or you look at whoever has the majority of tokens in that, or who has the highest token, and then they get extra points there as well. So very fun decisions for what is a basic worker placement action, but results in this interesting area control type of situation. Beyond that, there are not to go too deep into the game, but there are these jobs you can do, and you can end up killing your opponent's thugs, knocking them off spaces, throwing them in the river and stuff. So it's very thematic, very fun game to play. But the worker placement with that area control mixed in was really cool to me.
Tim, I'm not really a big Godfather guy. I hope the fans go into a fervor when I say that, but this game looks so sharp and it's so clean, and the tactility of those hexagons that you're stacking up for the area control component, and just kind of the wacky theme of it all here. I guess not that wacky. I guess a lot of stuff happened. It looks pretty cool. I want to try this one. It looks sharp. Love to get this one on the table as well.
I'll second that. This game looks absolutely awesome. And I mean, it's an Eric Lang game, so I'm probably destined to like this one. I was also admiring the art on it and thinking how nice it looked. And then I compared it to the Cthulhu Death May Die, and it looks like it's actually got almost the entirely same art team as that game, which is great because I like the art from that as well.
Yeah, it's funny. There's not a ton of art in the game. There are these job cards you get, and they'll have some art on them. But the rule book is how the Cthulhu Death May Die rule book is illustrated with these full color pictures of the characters and stuff throughout it. The Godfather rule book, it looks like it could have been the Cthulhu Death May Die rule book. It's like the same types of illustrations. You could tell it's the same people that did the artwork in them. It's beautiful, really easy, great rule book too. Something that CMON generally does really well.
Nice.
Up next for me is my Shim Phillips game that I was skeptical of until Tim had us play it on Board Game Arena. This is Architects of the West Kingdom. So that's S.J. McDonald and Shim Phillips, with art by, and published by Garphill Games. What I like about this one is you have a whole team of workers, and you're putting them out on these spots. Your workers stay there. They're kind of basic actions. Get some gold, get some wood, get some ore, whatever. That sounds boring. But your workers stay on there, and the more workers you have on the spot, the more stuff you get. So you're putting your third worker out, and your eyes start getting big. Whoa, look at all this gold I get now. Your fourth worker out. Oh my gosh, now I have like satchels of gold. This is great. But then Chris comes along. He goes to the capture workers spot and removes all of my workers from that spot. And now they're in like some kind of, I don't know, citizen's arrest on Chris's board. I don't know what's going on here. But that spot, the capture worker spot, gets better too as more workers are there. So you have this whole crazy situation where you're trying to capture other people's workers, but at the same time, you're trying to get a bunch of your own workers in these spots so you get more stuff when the workers go there. It's this whole dynamic. It generates this very highly interactive situation in a game worker placement that typically doesn't have that high of an interaction. So that was one of my favorite things about architects of the worker architects architects of the worker kingdom, architects of the West Kingdom, is the amount of interaction that's going on here, and the kind of sabotaging you can do of other people's workers. And you can send them, there's like a worker jail too, and you can free your guys out of jail and get them all back. There's a lot of crazy stuff happening in Architects of the West Kingdom.
That's a great choice, Adam. And I love your workers. I love your citizens arrest.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, there's some really great dynamics here for a worker placement game. And since we did the review, I introduced my wife to it, and it's now one of her favorite games. We've been playing it nonstop. And even at 2 players, it's pretty fun. But it's such an interesting dynamic, because not only do you have to capture, you want to stop your opponents from building up too much, so you capture their workers, and then you can send them to jail and make money off of them. But then also sometimes you're just running low on workers. You have 20 to start, but they go quick because these turns are quick, and you lose workers as you build buildings. You kind of leave workers permanently out. So you'll start to run out of workers, and sometimes you got to go and just capture your own workers. You got to take that action and capture your own workers back. So it's a pretty interesting dynamic on how this all plays out. Yeah, really good choice with unique mechanisms.
That was a unique statement right there, that you start with only 20 workers. I mean, how many games do you start with 20 workers, right? All right. Well, my number 2 game harkens back to another aspect of worker placement that Adam talked about a little bit with Anachrony. It's the idea of different workers having the ability to do different things. And that's not completely unique. I mean, it's definitely an interesting mechanism, but, like Adam mentioned, it's something that they do in Anachrony. A couple of other games that came to mind immediately that do that similar sort of thing that I considered using for this list were Darwin's Journey, where you get to train up your people, send them to university so that they can take better actions, or Godspeed, which we reviewed a couple of years ago, where different kinds of workers can take different kinds of actions. Like you can't have a scientist doing a military action, that sort of thing.
Chris, while you're talking about Godspeed, we need to go back and play that game again. I was kind of mediocre. I want to play that game so bad. I've been thinking about it tons. Let's go play Godspeed again.
Yeah, I mean, it's come up a couple times. I'm surprised that we've never played it again, but yeah, it's a cool game. And it's got that same idea of where you have different workers do different things. But a game that takes that concept and just like ramps it up to 1,000 is Chimera Station, designed by Mark Major and published by Tasty Minstrel Games. In this game, not only do different workers do different things, but you get to genetically modify your workers so that they can do all kinds of different things. And not only do you get to genetically modify them, but you actually have these little mini characters that you put on the board. And as you're genetically modifying them and adding new bits and pieces to them, you are physically adding new bits and pieces to them to make them bigger and bigger and bigger, so that you have these big unwieldy monsters that are, have all these different parts that can do different things. So the game itself seems like relatively basic worker placement, in the sense that you're on a space station, you're trying to build it out by adding different components to it, and different components give you different points and give you different benefits and various other things. But it's the workers where this game looks like it really shines. And this is another one that I have not played, but I have read about and am very interested in. And what you can do is modify by gene splicing your workers and adding on a couple of different alternative pieces. You can add in brains, which give you a more benefit. You have workers that have claws that can go in and basically snap somebody in the butt and move them off of space. So if you normally can't have 2 workers in the same space, but if your guy has claws, then they can come in and snap the other person, get rid of them. You have tentacles that you can add to them that will give more of an opportunity to collect benefits from a space, so it ups the kind of the benefit count of the space that you're on. And you have these leaves, like you can graft some plant matter and put some leaves on your workers so that it gives them something to eat when they're ready for a snack, because you do have to feed your workers in this game, which is one of my least favorite mechanisms. But at least here you can have workers that eat parts of their own body to keep them going. So it might be a little bit grisly, but anyway, this one looks like a delightful, fun little romp. And I love the fact that you actually have these pieces. I won't call them meeples, but they're augmentable pieces that get bigger and bigger as you splice more and more different parts onto them.
I have been wanting to play this game for years, and in fact, it is on Board Game Arena now. And so I've been thinking for a while that we should do a review on it, except that it's out of print. TMG, who used to publish it, went out of business, and as far as I know, nobody's picked this game up. And so I don't know that there's a lot of value to listeners to hear about a game that's out of print. But I want to try this game at some point, and I'm so disappointed because I have a local friend who has a Kickstarter version of this still in its wrap. So it's got all the upgraded components and everything, and he's trying to sell it. And I want to play it. I want to try it. I want to tell him to open up that plastic and let's play it. But he's not going to get as much money for it if he tries to sell it. Then so
just buy it from him.
Yeah, there you go, Tim.
It's an expensive out of print upgraded game, so I don't really want to spend $200 on trying this game, but it does look like a lot of fun. I'm looking at pictures of it right now too. I remember one of the mechanisms is that you're kind of going and like adding rooms or like new worker placement spots to this board, which is always a fun thing to me too when the spots build out in different ways every game. I really, I might have to make him open up that plastic, or else I'll give this a shot on BGA one of these days and see if it's worth. Maybe I'll try that. I mean, I'll make you guys play with me on Board Game Arena, and then I'll see if it's worth it. To buy a.
I'm all for it.
Chris, nice find. I don't think I've ever heard of this one, maybe in passing, but I had no recollection of it till you mentioned it. And looking at it, it looks wacky. It looks goofy. It looks like some silly fun going on here in Chimera Station. It looks delightful.
All right. Well, my next choice here is a game that I think is pretty underrated because I think this game is pretty great. Now, this is another one that Chris played with me. I don't know if he'll remember it, and I don't think he has as good of an opinion of it as I do. This is Euphoria, Build a Better Dystopia. This was designed by Jamie Stegmaier and Alan Stone and published by Stonemaier Games. And this is another dice worker placement game. So, and I'm right off the bat, you're going to hate it, and I'm going to tell you so many other reasons why you're going to hate this game. But it does some really unique things with worker placement. First of all, as many of these dice worker placement games, the number of pips on the dice represent, in this case, they represent how smart they are. And thematically, this is great because the whole idea is that you're running a civilization, a dystopian civilization, but you're trying to convince your workers that it's fantastic. And so the smarter they get, the less happy they are. So you have a risk of getting too high pip values on workers because they could get smart and then run away. The way this works is that you start with 2 workers, 2 dice that represent your workers, and you roll them, and that's their starting value, and that's their starting knowledge. So you will place one on a space on the board, and you can always place a worker, or you can do a pullback turn, kind of like Charterstone does, or Apiary. Those kind of work the same way. But when you place workers, there's a few different types of spaces on the board. Some of them just let you collect resources, but they give you resources based on the combined total of pips on those dice. Again, something that we saw in Apiary recently. So that's fun. You might even have a low value, but if you kind of piggyback on somebody else's, you might get some extra benefits. But then there are other worker placement spaces that can be bumped. So if you go there, someone else can come in behind you and bump, and then you get that worker back. And then the last type of worker placement space are these ones that you can put workers on, and you just leave them there. And once there's enough combined workers, then you unlock this beneficial building, but everybody who didn't help build it gets a negative effect for the rest of the game. And so there's a little bit of a race to try to get in there and support that thing, but you have to collaborate with the other workers, and your worker gets stuck there. But what happens anytime you pull back workers for any reason, whether one was bumped or whether you take a pullback turn, you roll your dice. And if you ever, and you add it to this modifier, everyone starts at a knowledge level of 3. So you would take your 2 dice, you add 3 to it. And if you ever hit over 16, you would lose a dice. Well, you can't lose 16 at the start of the game, or you can't hit 16 at the start of the game because it's a max of 15, but you can increase your knowledge. And so if your knowledge gets too high, which is a negative in this game, then you could lose a worker. Plus, there's an opportunity to unlock 2 more workers. And this is clever too, because you can either go to this space and spend water and you get morale back and a worker, or you can go there and spend electricity. You can shock them awake, and then you lose knowledge, but you get a worker. And once you have 3 workers, if you ever pull back and you roll all 3 dice, you're at a high risk of losing a dice there. So it's a kind of a push your luck. It's risky. You got to be careful about when you put a worker out on a space that somebody could bump you and maybe make you re-roll when you don't want to. Really clever dynamics here. This game plays wonderfully at like 4 to 6 players because every turn is lightning quick. There's a ton of interaction on the board here. There's these little things where you're basically like working together with hidden factions. So you're trying to move up these tracks to get you benefits. But if someone else has that same hidden faction, they get the benefits. Anyway, it's the knowledge and it's the fact that you can lose workers if they get too smart, which really makes this one stand out. A mechanism that I think some people will absolutely hate because it can be really frustrating. but it's kind of a light, silly game for a Euro game, and I've always had a blast with it.
Yeah, I've never tried this one. You know what? Despite all the things you said, I want to try this one. It looks cool, Tim. I like the art here. What is this? Chris, help me out.
Yeah.
Is this neoclassical or I don't know? It's got skyscrapers and zeppelins. So whatever that is. Anybody?
I was thinking almost like a Art Deco,
Art Deco?
Art
Yeah.
Deco 20s retro futuristic type of thing going on there.
Yeah, it's got such a cool presentation because it's got this beautiful board that represents the different like types of factions you're in. So there's all this great artwork behind all these crazy spaces all over the board and everything. And then you got all these colorful resources. So it's just like all together, it's just this like barrage of color out on the table when you're seeing this thing. I think it's beautiful, and all the unique dice with all their special gear faces on them. This game looks awesome, and it's really fun. It's a little clunky. It's like all the stuff I was explaining. It takes a bit to teach. Once everyone's playing, though, I've taught this to 6 people, several that were not gamers, and about 2 turns in, everyone had it, and they were just going, and people were laughing when crazy stuff happened in it, and table talk, and trying to convince people to help you build a building and things like that. And we got to a point in the game where we had one of our players never built any of the buildings, and in a 6-player game, that's a ton. They had like 8 negative impact effects that they had to keep track of the rest of the game. Like almost anytime something happened, we're like, no, you can't do that because you got this negative effect in there. So it gets really crazy and chaotic, but super fun.
I don't remember disliking this game, Tim, so I don't remember if I actually did or not, but I would be happy to try it again.
All right. Up next for me, a truly great worker placement game. This is Star Wars Rebellion. This is designed by Corey Konieczka, and it's by Fantasy Flight Games. It's an ultimate 2-player battle of the Empire versus the Rebellion. You guys are going to scoff at me for saying it's worker placement, but I submit to you that it is. It's one of the most unique worker placement games that there are. Here's what you're doing. You have
Well, before you get into this, first of all, if we didn't already lose all our listeners by you saying that you didn't like Godfather, we're going to lose them by you saying that this is worker placement. But please explain why you think this is worker placement.
Well, there are many reasons, Tim. First and foremost, let's just pull up the Board Game Geek page, the ultimate authority on all board games for our hobby, I would say. Some people would say. Let's expand that out. Let's look at the different mechanisms that it claims here. Let me find that. The mechanisms listed go down to the very bottom there are worker placement. Look at that. At the very bottom of the mechanism. So I don't know.
Is that like number 30 or something?
Board Game Geek has worker.
Did they just list all of them?
That's so it's on here. But here's why it's worker placement. It's great. You have a hand of up to 10 cards, 10 missions that are in your hand, or projects, missions and projects if you're the Empire, but 10 missions. You've got that in your hand. You have to decide which worker to put on which mission at the beginning of every round. So your different workers here, your different leaders. Princess Leia, she's better at sort of politics, and maybe she's not the best at special ops or scheming and going around doing this kind of stuff. So you look at the mission. What does that mission require? Well, it requires 2 of these yellow icons, say, and Princess Leia has 3 of this yellow icon. So that means if she gets challenged by one of your opponent's workers, she gets to roll 3 dice, and that other player gets to roll however many of that type of icon that they have sent to challenge Leia on her mission. So you have this decision process of which mission are you going to use, which leader are you going to use based on which leader or 2 are you going to use based on their icons, the strength of that particular worker to go get this mission done. And then you have to place it out on the board. So it's like a double worker placement. You got to put it on the card that you want to do, and you have to place it out on the board. Which planet, which system are you going to put it on to try to accomplish that mission as well? And some of the cards, it's almost like Dune Imperium. Some of the cards have a restriction. Oh, this has to be in a system that has an Imperial troop, or that has Rebel loyalty, or that has Imperial loyalty. There's little conditions that go with these cards. So that's kind of a double worker placement situation going on. You also have to decide which workers, which leaders you want to hold back that are unused. And those can go to countering your opponent's missions, or for moving your ships and troops out there on the board too. So maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but I don't think so. It doesn't, it's not the first thing that comes to mind when you hear Star Wars Rebellion. But I think it truly is a worker placement game where you have to decide where exactly to put which leader and which ones to hold back to counter to counter your opponent's sort of worker placement. So I think some neat things going on here, and a lot of those is the way the Star Wars Rebellion uses the leaders, the workers.
You want to address that, Tim?
Well, just that, I mean, I think that this would have to be the most unique worker placement on the list because it's barely worker placement, but it's fair. It's definitely interesting as far as a choice.
How does
it's just like, okay, so the definition of worker placement is typically there are action spaces that you can send people to, and then, you know, other people might be able to block, etc. That this is like you're basically just using a resource, committing it to a card, and then other people can respond with another reason. I don't know. It doesn't feel to me like worker placement, but again, you absolutely right. BGG mentions it as worker placement. I can see the case being made. It definitely stands out as unique because it just doesn't have most of the trademarks of worker placement to me.
I ain't fighting with BGG on this one.
Nice.
When you fight BGG wins.
That's right.
All right. Well, that gets us to the top of the list, and there was only one possible answer for me as to what needs to be number one on this list, and that is Pendulum, designed by Travis Jones and published by Stonemaier Games. This is such an interesting game, and for reasons that will become obvious in a second, it is an incredibly difficult game to get played, which is probably one of the reasons why you don't hear people talking about this one a whole lot. It probably deserves more airtime than it gets, but it's a hard one to pin down. Unfortunately, what I think that means is it's going to end up being this sort of museum piece, an oddity that doesn't get played a whole lot and maybe gets talked about once in a while. The reason why I put that as number one on my most unique worker placement game list is not because the worker placement type of things that you do are that interesting. A lot of it's very basic. You get a place a worker, get a resource. But what makes this game so unique is the fact that all of that worker placement is happening in real time. So you have these two different layers in the board, two different rows of worker placement spaces that permit you to do whatever the worker placement space does. Whatever that space has, it has two places you can do it. And each of those has a timer. And the timer is a little hourglass. And as you're progressing through the game, the hourglasses end up getting flipped when they run out, if somebody flips them, or somebody might not flip them. But when you have an hourglass on a spot, you cannot place a worker there, but you can't activate the space. Wherever the hourglass is not, that's where you can place your worker. So what's going to happen is physically, as you're watching this game being played, it's that the timers run out and they flip over to the other row, and they flip over and they start timing again until that one runs out. And then it flips back to the first spot. And so you're trying to put your workers out at the right time in the right space, so that when you're able to put the worker out where there's no hourglass, then you put the worker out, and then you're able to trigger that worker when the hourglass comes back, and you're able to actually get the benefit that's on that space. And so it is a difficult game to play, because if you haven't played it before, you have to take really kind of a round or two of doing it not in real time to understand the mechanisms of the game. So you almost sort of have to play a practice game in order to get to your actual game, which is what we did. Me, Tim, and Steve played when they were over visiting my house one time, and we kind of had to play a couple rounds where we played it in this sort of async sort of way. But when you actually get this game going in full, synchronicity, where you're actually playing it in real time, you're flipping these timers back and forth, and there's all these things happening, and people's hands are all over the board doing things. And one of the tricks is it's not like the timer gets flipped automatically. You might be like, I see that there's something that I want to happen here. I want to put something out. The timer's run out, but nobody's actually flipped it yet. I can still take advantage of that by sneaking something in before somebody realizes that it's time to flip that timer back over and close off the space that I want to use. Or, you might see that somebody wants to do something, and so you've got, an eagle eye on that timer, so that the minute it runs out, you can flip it back over and stop them from doing what they want to do. So it becomes this flurry of activity, and unlike any worker placement game that I've ever played before.
Yeah, this is an excellent pick, and one of the most chaotic games. Oh, so real time is not my thing at all, but I had a blast playing this. But it is so chaotic, and it's so it was such a fun time. There was so much of like, oh crap, I gotta get that in before he moves that thing, and then oh, he just took that spot for me right when I was about to take the thing. And what Chris didn't mention is I think there's actually 3 different regions, and there's 3 different hourglasses, and they all have different times on them. So there's one that have like easier resources to get. That one runs out the fastest, and then kind of the middling ones are a little bit slower. And then there's one that has really big benefits, but it takes a very long time. So if you commit a worker there and get this big benefit, you have to wait like 3 minutes before you can get your worker back. So you can only, you know, like you have to be careful about where you're placing your guys, because they could just get stuck there and you can't do any of them. They did like, so one of the things that can happen there is you'll get this, you put all your workers out and then you're just waiting for the timer to go. But they luckily added in a clever little mechanism where you get this little hand of cards, and they're kind of like, Concordia style, where you've got this hand of cards, but then eventually you can play a card that lets you pick your cards back up. So these little cards just do minor things, but there's something to do while you're waiting for the timers. But it's funny because you can kind of get in the rhythm of like, okay, so I'm going to start playing these cards out, and then you'll miss that timer was ready and your worker was sitting there for a while. This was a really fun game, but like Chris said, very hard to get into, and it would, you know, I think something that you could revisit a couple times in a weekend or over a couple weeks and have a blast with. But I think even after we played it, you know, it's been a year and a half or something like that, I don't think I could go back to it without doing that kind of test run again before we could actually play a real game. But yeah, very, very unique, very cool.
This is one I haven't tried, and one thing that stuck with me, I think you said this, Chris, and I hope somebody said it because it stuck with me somehow, that this was almost a choreographed, synced up, you know, you have to, once you're in the rhythm of it, it's like this dance almost that you get into this flow of flipping this timer and putting out these things and flipping this timer and doing these other things. Is that true? Did anybody say that, or am I just making that up?
I believe you heard that on the Board Game Barrage podcast, but we'll give them a shout out right now, because
Right.
That's what they mentioned when they did the review on it. So yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't have said that that felt like that to me. But it was definitely an interesting collaboration, because you do have everybody's hands in the same board moving things around, and it worked better than I thought, to be honest. Like, it felt like you'd just be like hitting people and knocking things over all the time. And it wasn't really like that. The board was laid out spacious enough, I think, where you could mostly get to what you needed to, do the things you need to. And there was a lot of flurry of activity out there. It felt a little chaotic, but it somehow worked pretty well. All right, so the final game on my list for unique worker placement is Underwater Cities. Now, this is a game I've talked about a decent amount. It's one of my favorite games, but I love what they do with worker placement here. It's the worker placement is pretty straightforward. Everything you're going to do in this game is by placing a worker. Like, you're basically building up the city, these domes with these little buildings around it and tunnels between them, and every one of those things takes an action space to do. What's unique about it, though, is that you always have a hand of 3 cards. At the beginning of your hand, you draw or discard down to 3 cards, and you have to play one of these cards every time you take a worker placement space. But the worker placement spaces are one of 3 colors. They're green, orange, or red, and the cards in your hand are going to match those colors. And so if you play a card or discard a card that matches the color of the worker placement space you're taking, you also get the benefit on the card. And that's where the fun comes in this, because there can be some it's a huge diverse deck of benefits. Some of it is like one-time instant benefits. Some of it is tableau building, like where you get to, you know, kind of build something that's going to trigger every income phase, or you're going to build something out in your tableau that just gives you an ongoing benefit when you do something else. So the cards are a huge variety. So it's always fun to try to find if you can put together a cool card, a cool effect with one of the spaces you were going to take anyway. But then the kind of neat thing is that you don't have to play a matching color. So you can just discard a card, still get the benefit on the space on the board, and not get the bonus effect, which you have to do sometimes because you really need to get in there and, you know, convert those signs to upgrade your buildings before Adam does on his turn. And you just don't have a matching card to do it. So you get that option, but it's more fun, and probably why I suck at this game, because I will almost never do that. I'm going to try to match up and get the best bonuses I can. I have a blast playing this every time. In fact, just thinking about this list today, I convinced my local group that I'm going to play with on Thursday to get together and play this with me. So I'm excited to get this to the table this week. But Underwater Cities, a really fun use of worker.
Yeah, Tim, I can't ever not match the cards. I'm just too disappointed in myself if I can't do that. And that's why I think I've played you 5 times at this game and lost handily every single time. Or maybe I'm just not good at this game. Probably a little bit of both. But it's a cool mechanism. I enjoy playing this one, and it's hard too. It's really hard for me. The whole player board on this one too, with your cities on the other end, and trying to go with a lot of stuff going on. Underwater Cities, a game that has a super cool worker placement, and kind of reminiscent of like a Dune Imperium or old Thunderpaw there.
Thunderball. I'm with Adam on this one. At least in that I hate not taking the bonus. I feel like a big dumb loser if I don't manage to get the bonus too, which probably limits tremendously what I'm able to actually do on a given turn.
Well, up next for me, the last game on this list, except for honorable mentions, is a newer game that I just recently got from Kickstarter. This is a board game called Ceres, as in the asteroid. So Ceres. This is by Gustav Sundström and Artipia Games. So here, what makes this one unique? You have everybody has their own personal workers, 5 little cylinders that you can go out to your normal spaces and get some resources and buy some cards, go up a tech track or do this, do that, or whatever. But also, there's this crew of workers flying into this asteroid, and that's a common pool of workers. So there's sort of this competition for the different colors. There's, I think, 4 or 5 different color workers that are coming in looking for work, looking to get hired by you. You go and you just grab a worker from this pool and put it on one of the techs or one of the, I think they call them regional offices or something, one of your cards, one of the playing cards that you have in front of you, and put the worker on that card. It just has to match the color, and then you get that bonus. So one of the actions you can take is to get more cards. You're building this tableau in front of you of worker spaces, and all of those are different colors as well. And the twist with this tableau that you're building is that you can slide one of those cards underneath a card that you've already built. So now I can slide a red card, say, underneath a blue card, and now I can take that red action with a blue worker, because that's the color of cards that's shown on top. So there's a couple things going on here. To get maximum effect, you want to stack those cards so you can get the double action, the double bonus from putting a worker on those cards. There's a competition. Maybe there's only 5, there's going to be however many cards in the market row. So like 5 cards, say, and maybe, I don't know, 4 of them are blue, and there's only going to be 2 blue workers in the common pool if Tim and I are playing. So you want to be first to grab those blue ones. And then now Tim can't use any of those cards. He can't use any of those what is he going to do with a blue card? So there's an element of interaction there with grabbing those workers that are most important first. So this whole the common pool concept of the workers, I thought, was something that makes Ceres a unique worker placement game. Not to mention, it's a pretty fun game. Now, Tim, when we played this one, I thought we had a good time. It's a very much of a point salad, not usually my thing, but I enjoyed all the points coming left and right here. I think you ended up beating me by like 2 points at the end of the game. So that Ceres, had a lot of fun playing this one. A very unique worker placement game.
One of the things I notice on here, Adam, is something that reminds me very much of the Terracotta Army rondel of actions here. What's the deal with that?
It's very dissimilar from that. So here you have your triple layer sort of wedding cake that spins around on the 3 echelons there. So that's just the asteroid belt rotating around in space. So at the end of every round, that thing shifts. The outer one shifts 1, and then the inner one shifts 2, or the middle one shifts 2, and then the very inner one shifts 3. So, or maybe it's vice versa, something like that. Anyway, you have this shifting pool of asteroids floating around out there in space, and that's supposed to represent how difficult it is to launch one of your little probes to go out there and get the bonus from mining these asteroids. So that's another neat element of the game. Nothing to do really with the worker placement aspect of it, other than one of the actions is launch a probe, and if you have enough, I think it's ice or lightning bolts or something, that's how you get your little probe out there to get the bonus. And for the most part, the asteroids that are further away, harder to get to, have the better bonuses, whether it be points or resources.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it completely blanked on how this game worked until you were just talking about it. But aside from those astronaut spaces, which are the cards that you are building up and putting those colored astronauts on, did you mention that there is also like a whole different worker placement thing where each of the kind of main actions you can take in the board are out on the main board, and then you're kind of competing. There's a few spaces, but you could take 3 of them, and then the other person can't take any of them. So you can block other people out on some of the actions on the main board.
Right. Those are the cylinders. Each player has those 5 cylinders that you start off with, and then you're grabbing astronauts as the game goes on.
Yeah, this game was cool. It was very much a midweight Euro, but it has the feel of looking at like the Terraforming Mars production. Like it's got kind of that old school graphic design, and just like CGI renderings of large planets in front of you. So it feels a little old school from that perspective, but it clever. Yeah, I mean, I had fun with it. It was good. Good interaction, good engine building, some little like knowledge trees you can move up to build your engine up. I'd like to play it again.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, cool. So that's our top 5 unique worker placement games. Did you guys have any runners up? This was a pretty hard list to make, to be honest, for me, because I mean there were ones I definitely wanted to talk about, and I think we touched on some pretty awesome games today. But a lot of worker placement is pretty standard. It doesn't stand out as much as these ones. Did you guys have anything that you didn't get a chance to mention?
I mentioned all of my runners up. They were ones like Great Wall and Godspeed that had similar mechanisms to games that I had already talked about, and so I just kind of tossed them in as we were having the discussion.
Yeah,
I had a couple. There's one, Argent, the Consortium. Have either of you guys played this one or heard of this one?
No.
I haven't. I've been wanting to play this for a long time, but I haven't had a chance to yet.
Yeah, that one is supposed to have some unique things going on. I don't know much about it, so I won't say much about it. And then there's your series of Luke Laurie games, Cryo, or the one with the wizards and stuff and the crappy dice rolls,
Dwellings
and
of
you
Eldervale.
lose because
Yeah.
of Dwellings. That's the one. And then Whistle Mountain, is that the one?
Mhm.
So all of these games, I guess it's not that unique since there's like 3 of them right there off the top of my head. But the twist is when you're pulling your workers back, you get to do some other kind of action as your workers come back into the fold. So it has a nice feel to it. The idea there is pretty neat for some of these games. Cryo is the one that stands out that I want to try from those 3 I just mentioned.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that'll wrap up the conversation today. We've got a couple reviews on Apple Podcasts this week, so we always appreciate our listeners for leaving these reviews. We're going to give them a little shout out right now. If you like the show, please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you listen to, but I do know Apple Podcasts, you can write reviews, so that's why I'm reading them there. The first one was from Brooke Z211 in the United States, and this was a 5-star review. The title was My Weekly Joy. This is a fantastic podcast that provides thoughtful and honest reviews of the games they've just played. As the title said, this is my weekly joy and my most anticipated podcast. It's a joy to listen to these friends talk to each other about board games. I don't normally write reviews, but my New Year's resolution is to give thanks to the things that bring me joy. Thanks, Brooks. That's so nice to hear. So nice to hear that we're giving joy to somebody. Like, that's something I never actually consider myself as a joy bringer. So that's awesome. The next review was from Edward Henry 3. This was also in the United States, and the title was The Best Board Game Podcast. And I can't argue with that, Edward Henry. But here's what he had to say. I've been a listener for nearly 2 years, and there's no better board game podcast out there. As someone who listens to quite a few, the main thing that makes BGHT stand out is the tightness of the episodes, which are short, sweet, and to the point without sacrificing any depth or fun. I don't know how these guys have so expertly mastered the art of being funny and charming to listen to while keeping their banter to a minimum. It's honestly so impressive. My second favorite part is how clear Tim, Chris, and Adam are about the things they like and dislike and why. Over time, it's been easy for me to figure out where my own tastes align or don't with theirs, which makes their takes super valuable to me. Keep up the great work, guys. Oh, and I'm Team Adam for sure. So
Nice.
Edward Henry's dredging up some old competition there. We haven't heard any call outs for a while.
We've
Fantastic.
we left that a long time ago.
Should we, is it,
no, we didn't. No, we didn't.
Are we restarting that for 2024? Adam gets the first vote in 2024.
Well, the thing I noticed there, Tim, you said you don't normally think of yourself as being a bringer of joy. I don't normally think of myself as being a purveyor of clarity, so I appreciated that comment.
Right? It's from all the editing we do.
Always surprising and shocking to hear these nice things people say about us when I know I'm a pure doofus.
No, totally. Really, really awesome. Thank you so much, you guys. And again, if anyone else wants to leave us a review, we'll definitely give you a shout out. Really appreciate it. And then lastly, as we mentioned on last week's episode, we just started up a Patreon and we've gone all in this week. So a couple exciting things happen on Patreon. So you can go to patreon.com/boardgamehottakes. First, we let listeners vote on the content for today's episode. So you want to be part of that. You want to pick what games we're going to be talking about. You get an opportunity to do that there. I also posted our first exclusive video there. So we're going to be doing some little short videos, posting them up there just for our Patreon supporters to check out, just as a thank you for giving us a little backing. And this week I started a series on games on my shelf. So I just picked 5 games off my shelf, talked about them, what I liked about them, if they're going to stick around, and I had some great banter with the other with the supporters out there. They chatted about it. We got a chance to have a little conversation going on that thread. And then lastly, at the end of this month, we're going to be doing our first board game giveaway at some of our supporter levels, and we're going to be giving away the advanced review copy that we received of Wormspan. This is at Chris's house. I had it, then Adam had it, now Chris has it, and we're waiting to send it on to a supporter here. So if you want to get into that, can come out and support us and get entered into that giveaway. And anytime we get review copies from publishers that that we want to hand out to listeners, we'll be giving them to Patreon supporters. So now's a great time to get in because it's not a huge number out there. So you got good odds. But again, any support you want to give us, great. And even if you can't support us, go to Patreon anyway and register as a free member, because then you can still just vote on our polls out there and kind of see what stuff is coming out. In any case, thanks for listening. Until next week, take care.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.